We have Eddie Armstrong, and he's the CEO and chairman of the Cannabis Capital Group, a consulting and advisory firm focused on the legal cannabis industry. He's the former minority leader from the Arkansas House of Representatives, and Eddie has been at the forefront of the fight to expand the availability of medical cannabis. Eddie has been profiled in a number of regional and national publications, including the Arkansas Business Journal's 2005 40 Under 40, Ebony's 2007 list of 30 on the rise, and About You's Powerful Men 2015. He has also been a regular guest on the Chicago Reader podcast. So we're going to turn it over to Eddie, and moderating this talk, we have Ebony Harris, who's part of the League of Women Voters of Chicago's Committee of Diversity and Inclusion. And we're really excited to have both of you in conversation with each other. So thank you.
Hello, Director Armstrong. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight. I just wanted to remind the audience members that if they have any questions or anything, we do ask that you hold the questions to the end of the presentation, but also to feel free to put the questions in the chat box. So I'll just go ahead and start with the presentation. So for Director Armstrong, in reading your bio, the thing that probably stands out the most to people prior to you entering the Chicago cannabis industry is the politics that you engaged in Arkansas. It's quite a change of stage and scenery. And what made you take the leap from coming from the Arkansas House to the cannabis industry?
Well, I'm going to digress and put my political hat back on for just a second. I'd be remiss to not say thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for actually having the foresight and vision to actually bring this conversation to the surface. I know that cannabis or marijuana has not always been smiled upon by the general public, but it is very encouraging to see corporations, entities, organizations, healthcare affiliates begin these conversations. And to the Union League Club and the League of Women Voters and this series on Chicago in Focus, I just found it really amazing when Jane reached out and offered this opportunity. The history of the Union League Club is tremendous. I am a former national spokesperson for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. So I'm an old Boys and Girls Club kid, and I know that that relationship is key. And so I just want to thank you all, the audience, as well as you, Madam Chairwoman, again, for just having me today. That was what we would do in politics. Now on to the question, and that was sincere as well. My leap from politics into cannabis, and in particularly to the state of Illinois and Chicago, were very interesting. In my third term, after serving as a lobbyist for a number of years in the agriculture industry, I worked for Tyson Foods, which is also located in Chicago as well now, and purchasing Hillshire Farm. But through that navigation of my third term in office in the House of Representatives, while serving as House Minority Leader, I witnessed some things happening in Washington, D.C. As I was an avid watcher of the politics of the hour. And John Boehner was making a shift as Speaker of the House to enter the legal cannabis market and begin work for Anchorage. And I thought long and hard. My family's background was in medicine and in toxicology services. And when we were introduced first to cannabis by Edie Moore of Chicago Normal, she's a family friend, but more importantly, she brought my wife and I to Chicago and said, this industry is happening, you guys should be a part of it. When she introduced it to us, we started to think of how could we unpack the politics bag in Arkansas and make our way to Chicago. And thank goodness we did that and move, in the heart of the city. But I decided to take a leap of faith and do something completely different with my life, understanding that there were risks in it. But I felt that if a politician that had no bearings on this industry or any concerns about the well-being or wealth of what it really did, and the fact that I've come from a family where I've lost siblings and friends to the war on drugs, to prison and death, I found it really, really important that I get into the hotbed of this issue. And that's why we made our way to Chicago and raising our little boy, Edison Drake. And we love this city. We're good old Arkansans, but the city has been great to us. So that's how I initially got into the cannabis space. It really was a leap of faith, taking my skill set in lobbying, government affairs, and then serving in the House of Representatives and my background in medicine and toxicology, and really diving into how that could impact the future of cannabis and the ancillary businesses that surround the industry.
Very good. Very well. Um, in terms of the recreational aspect of cannabis laws here in Illinois, um, we receive a lot of press for social equity provisions, but not everyone is convinced. Alderman Irvin of the 28th Ward recently lamented the lack of African American dispensary owners. Do you think that that law is working as intended?
I think it's too early to call on a lot of it, still. And talking to, real insiders, people that have blood, sweat, and tears, and Chicagoans that have been there for the beginning of time. When we got there, there was a lot of excitement and hope in 2016 and 17 as we moved towards the legalization through the legislature with Pritzker and Toy Hutchinson and others. But there's just a ways to go. I would say that the thing that's most encouraging is that I've never seen, and I've covered over 25 states in the United States working in government affairs, and now covering a handful of states in cannabis from Illinois all the way to Louisiana and mainly the Southeast region. But you all should be in some way proud of the aggressive push that you have had from your local and state officials. That's not happening in the country. Illinois, as you all know, was the first state to legalize recreational cannabis through the legislature. And those are monumental steps that otherwise you would have been waiting for the ballot signatures to be gathered, potential corruption. And now looking at the face of what, the alderman's doing, Alderman Irvin and others like Senator Hutchinson, with actually just staying out front to ensure that any framework of social equity, maybe we didn't get it right in its outset, but we have a chance to get it right along the way. And I really am, from an outsider coming to Chicago, I'm most impressed with that. And I think you guys, after some of the angst, pat yourself on the back, put your head down and go to work is the real long game here.
Understandably. What would you say is currently going on? You answered, I think, some of this earlier,
Sure.
But what is currently going on with licenses in Chicago?
Well, as you know, the licensing process, we applied for the dispensary licenses. If you've been tracking the news since January, most of that was stalled due to the pandemic. But then there was the unfortunate reality that we see in a lot of states, alleged corruption. Lots of individuals that initially applied as social equity candidates that had a lot of hope, put their own energy, time, money, faith in some of the big three, GTI, Cresco, and Revolution to incubate them, only to apply and watch most of those licenses go to one classification, which got the maximum amount of points, and those were veterans. And so, again, seeing legislation come forward that offers the opportunity to insert 75 more licenses to open up the playing field, you wouldn't see that in any other state. As you see right now, those that feel left out because the big three or four are controlling the industry, both on the cultivation, processing, and dispensary side. Those that have not gotten a license, I think the state's trying to make the right provisions to not give them away, but allow for them to be able to earn them, to really make this truly socially and economically equitable for those communities that were most impacted by it. As of this week, 2 days ago, yesterday, notices went out to individuals that did apply for deficiencies. And these were not like your traditional first deficiency notices where you may have missed some language in your application for various reasons, or you didn't add someone with a tax document. It's a very laborious process. But this opportunity was afforded to all applicants to go back to their applications and try and right their wrongs, dot their I's and cross their T's. And again, knowing the over-regulation in certain other states to keep this really locked to 4 or 5 or 10 growers and a certain number of dispensaries, Illinois has a chance to open the market up tremendously. So, there's a ways to go, but there's room now that you're seeing our drug czar, the governor, aldermen, state reps, really pushing for ways to open this up and say, hey, let's make it truly what we intended for it to be. So the status right now is people are getting a chance to correct their applications. They will have 10 days to submit those back to the state Department of Agriculture, and we will then be notified here in the state when they start to award new licenses to those that have applied. And then, of course, that's for craft grows and dispensaries as they consider opening that up for 75 new dispensaries to come online.
And then in terms of like action
Did I miss
planning.
anything there?
No, you
Okay.
covered it very well. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
In terms of the community level, like engaging the citizens and really getting people to understand the benefits to the cannabis industry, what do you envision action planning would look like, particularly for Black and Brown peoples? How do you see an action plan would look like, and then what would be some of the items in that plan?
Action plan as it relates to specifically?
To getting like more people to become entrepreneurs or to become interested in getting the licenses and things of that
Well,
sort.
I think one of the key points that people miss here is that marijuana from ground up as a grower or a dispensary is a cash intensive business. I mean, it's not a cheap business. It's tens of millions of dollars on the grow side, but nothing short of that on the dispensing side if you own multiple stores. And recently, I think about 2 months ago, I heard the great Senator Hutchinson mention that there are several different variables in this cannabis space. So my family, we were fortunate enough, we applied for a license in the South, and we own a now 100,000 square foot grow facility. We are the first African-American family to own one in the South, led by a group of medical professionals. And I've taken time to work in planting the dirt, to changing the light bulbs, to fixing the fans. But I've really enjoyed the true essence of the agriculture and the treatment that we're giving these plants. And what I would hope our communities do, Black and Brown and general, is not focus so solely on the growing and dispensing aspects of this. There are several key ancillary service opportunities in agribusiness and technology and electricity and hydroponics. The botanists, our tissue culture laboratories. There are several different additional components when you think about outside of just, oh, I want to grow it, oh, I want to sell it. Manufacturing and developing products start to think in that manner and being exposed in that manner and asking questions. If you're participating in this industry, the transporting piece is big. There are really key opportunities in this booming $100 billion industry that we're coming upon. And there's still a lot of room for people to get a piece of it. While everybody is barking about the true reality of those that are getting fat on the hog, the big boys, so to speak. I'm not as colorful as some of those tough aldermen there in Chicago. I'm still a good Southern guy, but there is a image that's being portrayed that only the white men with X amount of money, I think they called them land. It was in an article I read. The buck doesn't stop there, in my opinion. When I met my business partner and we developed the Cannabis Capital Group, we really wanted to look at things outside of the space of just growing and dispensing. How can we offer government affairs services? How can we advocate and educate people? How can we build relationships with the American Medical Association and others to really begin to beat the drum and carve out a business lane that others weren't thinking about, in addition to developing our equity crowdfunding platform, which provides us an avenue for those ancillary business services that likely would not be able to go to the bank or the SBA to get a small loan. They could raise their initial capital through our crowdfunding platform and then accelerate getting their business off the ground. So there are very unique and different things that are going on in and around this space. And it's a matter of just, inserting yourself, having patience. We didn't start with a lot of money. We put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and time into it. We saved and bootstrapped. And I couldn't be more proud of our efforts as we now embark upon 4 states. And you've got tons of big consulting firms, but we're really well positioned for where we are right now in the market. And I think others can come join us.
Thank you so much for that background. I think that's important to talk about, like the sweat equity that is definitely involved in the planning and then, developing further this industry. The other thing I wanted to talk about, turning into the business side, How is the cannabis industry, especially cannabis industry insiders, responding to the call for social and economic equity? Are they really changing their behavior? Do you see any type of modifications happening there?
I, so I got a different point of view on this, Sister Ebony. I think that we have to dial the clock back and understand that the authenticity of doing things different is going to take some peeling of the onion, dating back to the 1930s and how things proceeded after that with reefer madness and then the war on drugs and this seemingly never ending perpetual psychological breakdown of entire communities based off of propaganda on a plant that truly provided medicinal, therapeutic, I mean, the list goes on. We could talk for days there. So in breaking down some of those, I think, psychological ills and having true champions, again, like the state of Illinois does, that truly come from there. I'm using her thunder a lot, but Senator Hutchinson talked about how hard it looks to sell drugs on the street. It's not an easy job to be afraid of your life and drugs in your pocket that are illegal and the cops are maybe going to come. Who would want that life? And I think as we look at the framework of really truly being authentic and disciplined towards the cause of what the Illinois social equity model looks like, you have to take into consideration the number of arrests. The fact that Cook County led the country in counties with the number of arrests around 94% for marijuana arrests, and 72% of those individuals were African Americans or Black or brown. If we are going to turn back the clock or turn it forward per se, first of all, the inclusion piece of being able to make the social equity thing work by financially providing these loans that the state's trying to do, opening up the door for new applicants to have a chance to actually get a license and participate. And then more importantly, putting those license holders in those communities that they serve. It's local. It would be such a great reward to have dispensaries and operations and or transporters or mail delivery companies in the communities that were highly impacted by this, to shift the narrative from me being in handcuffs and thrown on a car because I may have a Swisher Sweet in my pocket, to now saying we've got a very good thriving business and we want to take the young people directly in our community and show them that there's an alternative route to something that they've been so stigmatized to for a number of years. So I have a different way of looking at that whole picture, because it's truly it has to come from that space. We are righting some wrongs, but we have a chance to get it much better in the right space than all the wrong that was done, because the money's there.
And certainly that speaks to accessibility and policy, especially public policy, for sure. I do thank you to Dr. Armstrong for these questions and for the topic. I have a couple of questions I see here in our chat box, and at this point, I'm just going to take a break and respond to some of those for now. Let's see. So the first question I have is, can Mr. Armstrong talk about why older Americans who may have had bad experiences with marijuana in the early days should be interested in recreational marijuana?
It's a great question. My grandmother's 92, my grandfather's 94. I never knew cannabis or marijuana in my house than anything other than dope. And it was bad for you. And again, that's a psychological mix up. It was bad as a kid. I went to college and it didn't seem bad when I was in my senior year. I survived. And then I became an adult and I really became somewhat of an enthusiast, not so much around the plant, but again, the therapeutic pieces. So for our senior population in our cultivation facility, I'll never forget this testimony. We began in our lab to really break down the plant, no different than breaking down any other plant until it's oil form. But we break these plants down and we're able to use some of the byproducts of these plants, as you well know if you're in the cannabis space, to create hand gels or creams that are impactful for arthritis and pain. So we took my granny and grandpa their first bottle for a just test run on a Sunday, and we sat next to them and we began to rub their hands. And Granny said at the end of the evening, I haven't been able to move my hands this well in years. What did you guys put on my hands? For our senior population, bad experiences at a time when it was about inhaling it or psychedelic mushrooms or any of those things that came through the generations, there's a story associated with all of them. In the cannabis space, if you don't know, there are several products that are not flower-based or smokable-based. Throat lozenges, gel cap pills that we manufacture, suppositories, hand creams, lotions. There are several different products that do not put you potentially in the same state that you once remembered it when you were thinking about it, as you still may be thinking about it today, and that's to get high or smoke a joint. There's now a way that without the impact of any brain high from the THC impacts of it, that you can experience a therapeutic body feel that actually allows for my grandpa and grandma to sit down, watch Gunsmoke. They're very relaxed, good people. Now we offer them half of an edible, a gummy bear, and they have to just suck on them. But I mean, it's really unique to see that, you know, their longevity, they're healthy people. They didn't believe that this was a good space, especially with my political background. They were really nervous for me. But I am witnessing firsthand the overlay of information and education with just sitting with two elder matriarchs and patriarchs of our society. My sister, fibromyalgia patient, experienced immense pain, rheumatoid arthritis, and we have found a combination of syringe or our cart oils, which, if you know these, one's called Rick Simpson oil, but just a dab of that on your finger and a little bit of that under your tongue in the evenings with a glass of tea. It would be a very interesting experience for those seniors. As you know, I would encourage to ask the questions of your children and your grandchildren to get educated. But I mean, there's opportunity for you all to have a great different feeling, and you don't have to be subject to pills. You could take a ration of turmeric, some nice green mint tea, and an assortment of products, CBD, available today that would give you a lot different feeling than some of the byproduct effects that you may get from many of the drugs that come from big pharmaceuticals.
And I think that's definitely an important piece to mention, to talk about, is the education, the awareness to health, the benefits to it, especially for the chronic diseases and illness. So thank you for reviewing that with us. I have a couple more questions. Let's see. The second one is, will federal law be changed to take marijuana, off the controlled substances list and allow the industry access to banking?
It's a twofer, so I'll go from the back. The industry's access to banking currently exists. Not all banks choose to bank this. There are new creative banks and small state banks, but your big banks like, BMO Harris declined us to open, our first account there, and that was okay. Bank of America, that was okay. We eventually found a banking home. But in this industry space, there are banks across the spectrum in most of these legal states for medical or rec. And they've gotten very creative in the pandemic times to where we're seeing less cash and more electronic transactions. So I think that will be addressed. The federal peel back of this law is going to go in, I think, a couple of different spaces. I liken what I think the feds will do to what happened with prohibition. They will say, okay, cannabis is legal like alcohol, and now states, under your own sovereign rule, whether you're medical or a rec or you're both, how will you choose to govern this on a state by state basis? The Fed's big opportunity here first, under the new administration, in my opinion, is to really look at the criminal justice aspect of it. And how do we take expungement and those that have been incarcerated for 20, 40 years over possession charges and assimilate them back into our society, number one. but let's not leave them on the hook that we just got them out of jail. I mean, so often I see stories on the news here in Chicago where somebody that was wrongly accused or convicted has spent 40 years of their lives and now they're home. And the real road is, how do we get them back in society, and where's their access point for a viable life and being able to be a working, tax-paying citizen again? And especially if they were caught on cannabis charges, what does the federal and or state laws do about that to open up the market for those people to maybe have opportunities to work in this industry space, especially if they've done crimes for time for it?
Exactly. Exactly. I'm so, glad, elated to hear you say that, because I think um, Chicago, New York State, especially the Rockefeller drug laws, the non-offenders, the automatic 5-year sentencing is a huge piece to this conversation, and developing solutions is what you just posited, because when we encounter the problems, we have to have some kind of sustainable outcome. So I'm so glad that you brought that up.
And I think the vice president is her prosecuting part is truly there. Now, we'll see what the governing is like, but I think from her past and the background of coming from California, we'll see what the president does to get in lockstep. But I can't be a little bit hopeful that there is a real voice of reckoning and understanding the plight of what this drug or this illegal substance has done to really change the landscapes of so many homes across our country. And now
Yes.
we have a chance with turning this clock over from a federal level to look at how can we right a wrong.
Mm-hmm. We definitely would have to have eyes of transformative thinking for that, for sure. That's a huge part of this. I have another question here. Let's see.
Oh, it's from me.
Okay, a question about the lottery.
Yeah, I couldn't type it out. Both. I have two questions, and neither may be grounded in reality. So, I was listening to a program, and I was in the car, and I only heard bits and pieces. You know how when you're moving about, and it was talking about how the lottery was stacked. That there is this lottery, but the way it's set up, it's the equivalent of some of the larger companies buying the equivalent of 100 lottery tickets versus the individual trying to break in being able to only get a hold of one. Did I hear that right? And could you explain a little bit to me what that's about?
I can't explain the back of what it's about because I'm not in that decision-making room, but the the frontline piece of that we have to understand is that 81 current, mostly white retailers have at least a year or so head start before this lottery came about. That gets worse every day. The new 75 retail outlets are at a huge disadvantage in this space, and the growers, because those that currently exist are so far ahead. So the disadvantage is in the fact that if you were a part of the lottery and you did indeed, you're one of the big 3 or 2 and you have multiple license applications in there, you just doubled or tripled your opportunities, whether you applied directly or you utilized a group and applied in association with them. And now you're going to implement your IP and your SOPs to go to market. You still benefit because you're reaping the harvest before anybody else can get in and participate. So there's a lot of angst there. That's why you saw the lawsuits come just when people were very hopeful that they had done their homework and due diligence. They got hit with an aha moment of, we are going to award these licenses to primarily veterans in this first, because they got these they got the maximum points for perfect score.
See.
And so there's just, I didn't and I don't agree with the lottery, but again, I'm not in the room making those decisions. I will participate in whatever the rules are laid out for us.
Okay.
But there's a big disadvantage right now, and that is where the real madness, so to speak, comes in, because people feel like they were cheated on an opportunity of hope from the very beginning. If they knew that, they would have all structured themselves a lot differently.
Yeah. Could I have a follow-up question, Ebony? Is there time?
Yes, there is. We still have some minutes left.
So I was struck by what you said about just how expensive this business is and pulling together the cash. And again, this is a question, once again, from ignorance. But is it possible to move in a direction, or have they already, where you can speak more in terms of franchise? You know, a lot of people can pull together the money for a Subway franchise. They could never come up with everything that they needed to actually run that have a company. Is there something like that going on that would open the door for people who?
I don't know if it's going to open the door for for the people applying now, but I can tell you that the bigger companies have already began this franchising model, whether they be growers or again, identifying people that own licenses in other states. So they consider what you call MSOs, multi-state operators. Cresco is one of those, where they own several affiliates across the country. That they may not be the person on the ground every day, but it's under the corporate umbrella, and there's a franchise, so to speak, division or individual that has the know-how of going out and structuring these deals in a franchising model. I think the thing that frightens me sometimes, and you've got to have real logical, but at the same time relatable people that can get out here and hit the ground in your C-suite, is that these companies take off. They've invested a ton of money. Their heads are down because they're focused on how can they get their return as quickly as possible. And while their heads are down, they can't look up to see around for some of the things we're talking about. You know, how do we get out here? And if we are, you know, in Bronzeville and we want Bronzeville to thrive, where is the family or families that we could go into that community, cultivate the relationships on the ground, no different than old school community policing before it turned crazy, and build up. If the capital is already there, it takes people within those C-suites or assigning people within those C-suites to go into these communities and look at real opportunities for infringement, as opposed to, we've got all the money, we need your face, we got all the information, we'll plug in the blanks. And once we get the license, we'll pay you and you ought to be happy. People really want an opportunity to thrive and be, you know, vigilant in this industry and not necessarily be owned or bought because the big guys can do that. And that's happening. So
Evan, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I have a question. My name is Vanessa Ford. I actually work at a school for retrieved high school dropouts, many of whom have been caught up in this whole drug issue, have, you know, had their lives turned up for this. We have talked about in the school, because a number of them have really good entrepreneurial skills, and the industry they're most interested in is the cannabis industry. And so we've been trying to figure out, how do we tap into that to train them to prepare for even some of the ancillary businesses you talked about, to get them to think about ways that they can participate in this and not just be on the losing end of it. Are there any initiatives that might address some of that?
When I think about the work that Arnie Duncan and his group are doing to try and take these young boys and these guns as young as 12 and 13, because again, their community, a lot like my community, I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 1990s, and between 1992 and 1995, we outpaced Chicago with the number of deaths per capita for some time. But that stuck with me for a while because my mindset was on either I'm going to sell drugs, go to prison, have a baby out of it. But these are the things you're hearing and you're seeing. So unfortunately, these young boys that are dropouts in these communities with this perpetual cycle quite naturally want to go to cannabis. So to your question, and here's the answer. Institutions like Chicago State University and what Madam President is doing there to start developing programs around education curriculums in the cannabis industry space. Other institutions, potentially, some don't, but some have taken the risk. The University of Wisconsin, I know, has got a program now. Because of their federal dollars, some stay away from this, a lot like our hospitals, but aggressive universities, no different than the University of Mississippi, who's been studying cannabis for over 60 years, and certain individuals have been able to receive it. Partnering with these universities and institutions and starting to develop and or talk through collaborative programs about, first we got to get in the inside of the industry to know, but There's space for horticulture training. These young boys can learn how to water these plants. There's space for packaging training and learning how to make these products through the kitchens and the processing. There's space, again, like I said, in the lighting and electrical space. I mean, there are just a number. We employ 145 people in our facility, and I've never seen people more enthused, young people, black and white, working alongside each other, but they love working in this industry space. And that's going to come for programs like yours. I think the best way to get a tie there is identify a university of higher education that's focused on progressing the needle of education around cannabis, not just the plant, what it does, how it gets you high, but transitioning that into real key areas within the industry. And then along that same pathway, identifying a Cresco, identifying a Green Thumb Industries, to have a true collaborative partnership with, where not only are they partners and they're bringing their top scientists. I mean, we've got MIT scientists in our lab, in our tissue culture lab, studying our plants on a daily basis, bringing those scientists in to give one-on-one basic education to these young kids that are dropouts. I mean, their eyes will light up, but there's in my opinion, a three-part approach of finding the private sector that's willing to take this on, identifying an institution that is already moving in this direction, and taking your students and implementing them directly into these types of programs as the approach.
Thank you, Director Armstrong. I have a couple more questions. Just want to make sure I get them in before our time is called. We have, as a consumer, there are resources available to help identify on the retail level which vendors are minority or small business owned versus large companies.
Repeat, I'm so sorry.
Nope, no, it's fine. As a consumer, are there resources available to help identify on the retail level which vendors are minority or small business owned versus large companies?
Yeah, there's research out there, yes. And, you know, there's organizations like Chicago Normal, who I've oftentimes leaned on. They're just the best at grassroots, in my opinion, and calling it like it is. But there is significant research on identifying who the big boys are and who the mid-sized folks are. And I mean, open the paper. There's so many stats. I've got folders full of that specific information on the number of African Americans that own or that are participating. I think, as I mentioned, none of the dispensaries are Black owned, but 72% of all, again, cannabis arrests in the state are Chicago African American, Chicago Black people. So that's a really compelling fact when you think about that. And then you say likely 80% or more of all of these dispensaries and or cultivators are owned by people that don't look like us, probably don't come to these communities, and won't come at this stage, if you ask me. So there is information out there, and it's pretty easy to find it at this point. There's a story a day.
Okay, I have one more question. Let me get back. Is there a way to invest to help the local Black and brown companies?
Is there a way? There are multiple ways, yes. Our company is a vehicle in which we've identified, you know, companies that are coming out of the gate that would really like to get into this space. One of my partners, if you don't know her, you should Google her tonight. Wanda James is a national icon. She opened the first female-owned dispensary in Colorado and is just a true champion. But she is specifically looking at ways to build a fund of funds that identify minority-owned businesses coming up around the country and investing in them. If you personally would like to invest, our partners at Cannabis Capital, where Wanda and I serve on their board, are two avenues in which, if you were trying to find ways to specifically invest in Black and brown business owners and where they were across the country, the answer is yes. And more people are having the appetite on a daily basis to get involved outside of the business owners that own these cannabis companies. I'm talking about Black enterprise people on the Black enterprise list that really have, you know, the discretionary capital to get in this and make these investments. So yes, if you'd like more meat and potatoes, I can give you more direction.
All right, thank you for these questions. We have time for one more before we conclude tonight's event. Is there one more question from anyone?
I think there's a few questions in the chat, Ebony, if you.
Yeah.
Okay, because I don't show.
I'll go ahead while you're looking and ask a question. I think there's one. Is there, okay, I'll read it for you. Is there a way to invest in, to help the local Black and brown companies? So, ways of helping. I'm reading someone else's question, and then I have one too, so you have time.
Okay, okay.
So yes, I mean, these Black and brown companies are getting very, some very impatient. Some have lost a lot of money and time based off of the pandemic. We all went through a very rough year last year, and in hopes of being awarded these licenses last summer, only to be told that it would be the end of the year. And then at the end of the year to be told it's going to be postponed until sometime in 2021. Identifying those companies are not hard to find. Again, you can just pick up a month ago, Chicago Sun-Times, there's testimonies about companies that either are applying for licenses and have big ambitions to revitalize their communities. And those would be, some that I would, take the first step at looking at who's in your backyard, who's in the adjacent community to wherever you may be, where would you like to go and invest, and then begin to do the research and identify some that you could latchkey. And again, we would be happy to assist in helping to identify those as well.
I have a question, and you may have done research on it and been able, being on a college campus, I can attest to the fact that there was a very strong underground industry for selling cannabis across the state before the law changed. And I'm wondering what's going on with that? What's going on with those dealers and all these people? I can't imagine they've all disappeared at this point, especially during the pandemic. Do you have any information that you could share with us on what's going on in that, parallel industry?
Yeah, and it's heartbreaking to some degree, but it's still illegal and it's a crime. In certain states that have legalized this, if you're caught with it and you don't have the proper identification and you're breaking the law, you will get arrested and you still will go to jail. And unfortunately, a large number of those drug dealers look like me. And that's an unfortunate reality, but I've given you the backstory on why some of that may be the case, given the backgrounds we come from. I know that the black market, so to speak, still exists. You are now seeing now that it's recreational or fully legal, very creative salesmen, boutique dispensaries and homes. Some of your masseuse and your massage therapists are now offering products in their business establishments. And then you have your everyday average peddler that still may have a clientele that he delivers to by bike, no different than Grubhub. Because the market is now recreationally open, they still exist, but I think you've just opened it up to the lion's share of new customer demand. I don't think you would ever get rid of them all at the end of the day. That's just a natural reality.
Well, Director Armstrong is about 6:49. Do you have room for one or two more questions, or?
Yep, only if you call me Eddie from the rest of the night. No more direct.
Okay. I will certainly bear that in mind. Thank you. So we have a few more moments if someone else wanted to ask Eddie another question.
I'm just such a question box. Everybody here knows that, right? What about hiring people in the community? So it's not Black owned, but can it be Black run? And I've heard that I guess it was the alderman was going on about how there are young Black people on the books that are in like 5 different stores and couldn't possibly be working in all those stores. So there's some cooking of the books in terms of trying to show that they're hiring from the community. Could you talk about that?
That's new to me, but I'm not surprised. There are just several different components of how this industry is shaping up. I can't speak to that directly, no.
It was a very angry, I'm sorry, all my questions are along this lines, but he was furious and these were all the kinds of things he was saying. And I just was wondering.
I don't doubt that. I don't doubt, because of my inside knowledge, that you see small dispensaries yet again get ahead of those that have been left out by way of buying points of equity in these large cultivation companies and being able to kind of eat double fold. So you're buying the product from the dispensary if you're a customer. That said, customer, it continues to buy that product. The dispensary is now an owner of a cultivation that's growing it and has exclusive rights to get it from that cultivator. No law denying that that can't happen. And I'm watching that pick up across states, especially in the South, where that's beginning to take shape. So, whether you're hiring a bunch of people to cook your books or padding your pockets by joining a cultivator right now, but while the getting is good, there are things that are happening, and there's just a lot of work to do along the way to not only regulate it, but let's try again, like I said, to get it right out the gate for what hasn't been right thus far with certain proportions of the social equity piece of it. That way you don't have to worry about hiring somebody to cook your books if you're really intentional about making it work.
Right.
Right. Is there one more question?
Abigail typed one in the chat. How many marijuana users are there? I'm assuming across the country or in the state or whatever. I'll add Abigail's.
I don't have that number in front of me, but let's just forecast out and say over 1 million plus, I'm sure. When you think about Colorado, Oregon, Washington State, and Nevada, and the position that they now have on it, in California, and then looking at, one of the, top largest cities in the country going as aggressive as the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois has gone, well over 1 million plus users, I'm sure, of some form. And everybody is not a smoker, ladies and gentlemen. People consume it a lot of different ways in the current state that we are in, and they enjoy going to the store and buying these products. It's on your jobs, it's in your workforce, it's at your lunch cafeterias, and it may not be in the form of somebody smoking a joint. They, it's there in many forms, and this conversation and many of these conversations must continue to happen in the business workforce and with organizations like your esteemed group today.
I just have a quick question, wondering if you have any sense of the timeline for finishing up the new applications that are in the pipeline, when some of those decisions might be made?
The current pipeline,
Yes.
10 days from yesterday is when the said responses have to be back. If you've got a deficiency notice from the state of Illinois for your recent application, you have 10 days, which is February the 5th, I think. Yes, to get your responses in, and then post that another 30 days maybe before you begin to see any new announcements. It could be longer, depending on who knows who may want to sue, and who may not have gotten their questions in through some technical difficulty, and who may be. So, but the short window is, I think, over the next 30 to 45, maybe 60 days. No fears from if the pandemic slows us down, things may be.
So maybe March is when people might see some news of what's going on.
Potentially, and that will all come down after all the responses have gone back into the state. I'm sure they will let us all know when to expect responses, because people will be anxious.
And I actually just have one more question, and that's just for clarification's sake. It sounds like what you were saying is that in the process, you get certain points for certain, I don't know, characteristics or whatever, and that veterans were given some sort of preference. Is that correct? So many points for being a military veteran?
Correct. So in these applications, there are certain variables on your facility parameters, your security plan, your grow plan, your hiring plan, your diversity plan, your environmental plan. They're just, and then the makeup of your group or your entity, who owns it, who's truly African American, who's woman, who's, all of that goes into there. And to some degree, the rules can be written sometime where many assumed social equity, the campaign was about Black and brown communities. This big leap was taken across the city and state to get Black and brown communities to apply. Big companies paid money to train these communities and people to apply. And unbeknownst to them, one of the big keys were for getting maximum points in I forget the exact category it is. If you were a veteran listed on your application, those were awarded the maximum amount of points versus Eddie Armstrong getting the award just because we thought we wrote a good application. I mean, we probably still did, but we didn't get awarded because we didn't have a veteran on there.
Right, and so they didn't take into account that so many Black youth who can't become part of the military because of their backgrounds, which eliminates them right away. And that's not to say that they would have been major investors, but they might have been part of an investment group.
I agree with some of that same money that they're getting incarcerated for. I totally agree. I think we have to save our own. I think, like I said, CSU, and I know of other schools, but specifically President Z, that they invited me, they committed to it. They are really trying to put some attention there. And I hope that other schools and institutions across the city will look at that as a conduit. I mean, there's a real opportunity here to be a bridge in the middle of the Gulf for, like you said, some of these young people that may never be able to cross over if we don't incorporate some new opportunities for them.
I'm wondering about the city colleges. A lot of them have that emphasis on the medical professions. Seems like there could be a connection there.
Absolutely. I mean, from a therapeutic perspective, you think about articles a year ago on the surrounding suburban communities of Chicago and the plight on the opioid crisis. Each Sunday, there was something really sad going on. And I don't know if those numbers have declined, but there are studies in states that have gone medically legal that show that there are a great number of patients or people that are turning down the pills and taking some form of cannabis now, or utilizing some form of cannabis. And I think that the same attention that was paid to that plight on opioids should be the same attention paid to the plight on social equity, economic development, and advancement in the cannabis industry space for Chicagoans.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there any move afoot to change the criminal code to delete those statutes that these people who are convicted can now have their convictions erased?
There are conversations happening there, and I think that, you know, between the Cabrini Green Legal Aid Fund and what they're doing and others, the steps are being taken. However, you must understand, having your records expunged or your records sealed is a pretty long process, and most of these individuals can't afford attorneys. So you go through that process, then you have to get access to someone that will hire you while it comes off your records. And so there's a lot of work there. One of the things that, you know, we were very excited about in our craft grow application efforts there in Chicago, and I mean in the city of Chicago, is, you know, prioritizing the expungement receipts for our hiring. We want to make that a priority, that as you expunge these records, these are some of the people we want to make it a priority when we're awarded a license to put into our workforce immediately. Even if it's in the process that they're waiting to get their records expunged, we want to identify them and potentially partner in ways that they can truly be a part of our workforce. However, the caveat there is we're still waiting on proportions of what the federal law may look like to impact if you can actually work. You know, what does that look like based on your convictions there? So there's some overlap, but we've got relationships in Washington and great relationships here in Chicago that I think we can pull this off.
So there is a move afoot to remove from the criminal codes
Correct.
these criminal charges.
Correct. Both
And
at
I
the
think,
federal and state level. I'm my biggest fan just came into the house, my 4-year-old. So I apologize if you hear any noise.
no worries. We thank you for your time and value the discussion this evening and the background that you set before us to consider. Again, the policy, educating ourselves, the community, and learning more about this industry. There are some local agencies here in Chicago, the not-for-profits such as Breakthrough Urban Ministries that has addressed some of the issues that Eddie just raised about expungement of records and assisting people with getting help, with getting their name and their records cleared to move them ahead in a more progressive lens. So it's a lot of work to be done for sure. I don't want to belabor any more of your time for this evening. This has been a wonderful event. It's been very informative. We need to definitely have you come back for a part 2 or a follow-up, perhaps later in the year. I would like to wrap up. It is about 7:01. And I don't want to take any more of your time. So are there any closing remarks you want to make at this point, or?
Just extremely humble and always grateful for an opportunity to provide education and information. Special thanks to Jane Ruby. Again, special thanks to the Union League and the League of Women Voters. My passion for public service is an extension of this work that I'm doing in cannabis. I will forever have a passion to help other people. So at the forefront of all the work we're doing, it's about giving back and being able to help individuals. So thank you guys very much for allowing me to share a bit with you today, and I appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you, and all the best with everything that's coming in the future for your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chairwoman Harris.
No worries. That concludes our event for this evening for tonight's Chicago in Focus, the League of Women Voters Chicago. We again want to thank our speaker that we had, Eddie Armstrong, Jane Ruby, our guests, the Chicago Union Club, for the participation and for the remarks. And everyone, please have a good night, and thank you for your participation this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem.